These are highlights from the show you are about to view. Watch this video for an excellent summary of what it takes to work with wild black bears in Louisiana as part of the Black Bear Recovery Program for that state. The Louisiana black bear, Ursus americanus luteolus, is Louisiana's state mammal and the state's best conservation success story. John Hanks is the Large Carnivore Programme Manager for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. So how do you get to work with wild black bears? John describes how his career developed. He started out as a regional biologist. He gained extensive experience with black bears because he was at that time working in an area with a dense black bear population. John explains the skills and personal qualities a person needs to work with black bears. To start off with, he likes to see new entrants with basic outdoor skills: loading a trailer, riding an ATV, comfort with arms and ammunition. He suggests a career plan, beginning with gaining outdoor skills, move on to networking, reading extensively, and attending conferences. Black bears evolved about 5 million years ago. If you are learning English as a second language, this video will be useful because you will hear two accents, a British and an American one. And before we go any further, I would like to say thank you to my subscribers. Without you, there would be no channel. I appreciate the support of each and every one of you. Thank you very much. Managing recovering populations of wild Louisiana black bear and living the wildlife looks like this. John, you and I have been corresponding for weeks during the planning stage of this, but for the viewer who doesn't know, what do you do?
Well, I'm the Large Carnivore Program Manager for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. And mostly what I do is manage our black bear population. Our black bear is the Louisiana subspecies. It was listed as threatened in 1992, and it was just recently recovered. It was delisted in 2016.
Wow. And it's a subspecies that is endemic to Louisiana?
Yes, so any bear in Louisiana is considered a Louisiana black bear. Now, its historic range was East Texas, about the bottom third of Arkansas, and most of Mississippi, and maybe even farther than that.
Wow, that's amazing. Really. So, John, please tell us, how did your career develop?
Well, I started out as a regional biologist here in the northeast part of the state, and when you hire on with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, you're tasked with many species. We manage everything from songbirds to alligators. And I just happened to live in a region where there was the most dense bear population. So by default, I got a lot of experience with black bears that you might not have gotten in another part of the state. So later on in my career, I had, it was just a few of us that had, more bear experience than other people. And that's how I ended up where I am today. I didn't set out to be a bear biologist, but here I am.
Wow. And is the Louisiana black bear particularly rare, John?
Not necessarily. They just by looking at them, you can't tell them apart. From the Arkansas bear, which is the eastern black bear. You have to do. There were some measurements done in the '90s, and of course, with technology and the way DNA is today, we might find out. I believe there's 60 some. I'm sorry. I believe there's 16 subspecies of black bear throughout the United States, and as DNA gets better and all, we might find out that there's not really 16, maybe there's 10 or 12 or 2, who knows. Technology is constantly developing and we're constantly learning things, and maybe something we knew, but we didn't know what we were missing. We know more now than we did 30 years ago, and certainly more than we did 100 years ago.
Mhm. I'm familiar with something called the North American model of wildlife conservation, John, which we don't have in the UK. We've probably got something equivalent, but um, and I'm aware of the role of hunting in that. Is there a hunting season for the Louisiana black bear, or are they strictly protected?
So their first hunting season we'd had since 1987 actually happened this past year in 2024. They had been hunted throughout history and protected in certain areas and certain times, and they were completely protected in 1992 when they were listed. But they've been recovered since then. I believe the last bear hunting season that I can find in our regulations was 1987. So not quite 40 years ago, but they are hunted now. But it's not an open hunt. It's a very limited lottery. There's some requirements of our hunters that we don't require for other things, such as deer or waterfowl or something like that. You have to attend and go through a hunter education course. There's a wanton waste rule in our bear hunting that we don't have with other game. You have to remove all the edible portions of that bear. We want that bear to be utilized. And then bear fat is kind of like when you talk to culinary people, it's like gold. So,
Wow, gosh, interesting. What is the population size, John?
well, we have subpopulations that we monitor constantly, and we do these hair snares, really a capture mark recapture, and it's the best thing going for populations at this point. And they're very good, but they take a long time to do. So in our subpopulations that we monitor, there's about 1,000 to 1,200 plus. But if you want to go statewide, it's probably more like 1,500. Now that's an estimate. It could be 1,750 or it could be 1,390. You're just kind of guessing at it. But it's roughly about 1,500 bears statewide.
Wow. In terms of conservation status, because it's a subspecies, and given what you've said, there are 16 subspecies in the state. Is it considered endangered or vulnerable?
No, it was listed as threatened, but since it's been recovered off the list, it's not listed anymore. It's not considered threatened or endangered. Our neighboring states like Mississippi have a few bears. Texas has a few bears. Arkansas has quite a few bears just north of us.
Mm-hmm.
They have probably 4 to 5 times as many bears as we have.
Mm. So, somebody coming to watch this video, John, I imagine they would be. It's really intended for students, outdoors people who are considering a change of career. Anybody who's serious about pursuing a career with large carnivores in Louisiana. So that said, what jobs are there with black bears?
Well, there's my job, which is the program manager, and then we have our Louisiana large carnivore biologist, which mostly does bear work, and we have temporary type technician jobs when we're doing our hair snare projects. Those are usually college students. We also have contractors that may do nuisance and conflict resolution, but may also do some trapping and stuff like that. But there's only 2 permanent positions in our bear program or our large carnivore program. But we also rely heavily on our regional staff. While they are wildlife biologists, they may not specialize in anything in particular, but they're doing everything from whitetail deer to waterfowl to turkeys to non-game animals, and including bears, depending on where they're located in the state.
Don, can you explain a little bit more about the bear snare project? What's that about? What are the goals of that?
And so that's how we monitor our populations. And it's essentially a capture mark recapture, but a little more complicated. So we build these snares. And when I say a snare, it's not a traditional snare like a loop that goes around something's neck. What it is a 2-strand barbed wire fence, and the low wire hits you just below the knee, and the high wire hits you just above the knee, about hip length. And it's about the square footage of what a pickup truck would be. So maybe the square footage of a king-size bed or a little bit bigger. We hang a bait in the middle that's elevated, usually about 6 feet off the ground. They're randomly spaced across the landscape, so they have just as much chance to be in a high bear density as they are in a low bear density, and they're evenly spaced. The bear visits that site. It leaves hair on the barbed wire. The technician goes and checks that and pulls that hair. We can send that off and get DNA.
John, how does working with wild bears differ to working with those in captivity?
Well, I've never worked with captive bears, but I can tell you just a little bit of dealing with I've had with zoos that maybe have a black bear and they had some technical information they wanted, or maybe it was a bear that had come from the wild. That those bears are in a cage or in a setting where they're dealing with the same people over and over again. You can train them to get on the scale to be weighed, maybe to present an arm to get, or a leg to get some blood drawn. You kind of know their personality. You can maybe tell they're a little grumpy, or hey, this particular bear is a lot more aggressive than that particular bear. In the wild, you may be dealing with a bear that's never even seen a human. You have no idea. There is no cage. There's no bars. You may be looking for this bear. It may have a GPS or telemetry collar, and you're close, but you're in habitat such that it's thick and dense, and you can't see them, and you're inside of 10 feet with them. So I would say that it's can be hair raising at the at the least. But it's much different because you don't and while you're looking for this particular bear that may be collared, that doesn't mean you're not going to encounter other bears in that same area that are not collared, that you're not even aware is there. So it's a big difference between in the wild and in a captive setting.
When you're in the wild, in the field, in the context of your professional work, what is the first or second safety protocol that you have to follow? I mean, when you're preparing to go hiking, for example, you read about shouting about "Hey bear" in order to not surprise a bear. How does it differ as a field biologist?
Well, it differs a lot with us because we're not trying to scare the bear away. When you're hiking, you need to sing and clap and talk loud, and they tell you to ring bells and blow whistles and all kinds of stuff. We're trying to be stealthy and sneak up on this animal. We're maybe trying to anesthetize the animal to change a collar, or we're going to den the animal to see if she's been reproductively successful, and if so, how big are her cubs, how many cubs, what sex are they. So we're going against what we would advise you to do.
Skills do you need to be a field biologist specializing in black bears?
Well, usually when you come to work, especially if you're just a college graduate with a bachelor's degree, you have limited experience, and we don't expect you to know all about handling bears and stuff. But what we would like for you to do is have some basic outdoor skills. So if you grew up hiking, camping, fishing, maybe even hunting, depending on where you are, you're going to be more familiar with outdoors, more comfortable in outdoors. You don't have a lot of entry-level jobs that are only bear. You may have entry-level jobs that deal with a lot of species, kind of a jack of all. That's kind of how I started. Then you may lean one way more or another with a bear. Now, if you got a master's or a PhD and you specialized with bears or large carnivores, you have more experience. Probably worked in some field studies with other graduate students, and that gave you some more experience. If you're very specialized and somebody's looking for a particular trade or particular skill set, you may be able to fill that niche. But usually, when you get to this specialty level, whether it's deer or waterfowl, you're not right out of college. You've been doing it a little while, and maybe you've shown an aptitude for that particular species. But you also need to know what else is going on in that habitat. I'm over here looking for bears. What else lives here, and what time of year is it, and are they active? And in Louisiana, we have a terrible lot of mosquitoes, and you don't think about that being a problem. But if you don't have any mosquito spray or any repellent or a way to keep them off of you, it can make your life downright miserable.
What skills do you find new entrants into field biology and carnivore biology usually lack?
What we want is them to have, be comfortable outside. Maybe they have some ATV and boating skills. One of the big ones is being able to hook up to a trailer, pull a trailer, and then back up a trailer. That is much harder to do if you've never done it. You also firearm experience. This is when we have hunting here, but even in states and in countries that you don't, if you're not emotionally able to euthanize an animal, you're not going to fare well in this, because while that's part we don't talk about a lot, it is part of the job. You need good people skills, because especially with black bears, most of the time when somebody calls us, they're very unhappy. Either the bear's torn something up, or the bear's scared. They're scared of the bears, or their children are scared of the bear, and it could be as simple as they just saw a bear across the road and they don't want it in the area. You have to have good people skills, and you have to be able to take some criticism, and you have to kind of put yourself in their shoes and show some compassion, and then have a resolution for them. But you have to remember to always be nice. I'm a public servant. There's only so much I can do, but another thing you can do is call them back and check on them after you've left, whether they've agreed to do what you've asked them or not. Just don't forget about them, and the more you're in contact with them, the more they may warm up to you, and the more they may take your advice.
What steps can graduate students take to get those skills that they lack, those outdoor skills?
Well, they can start, in high school or an undergraduate, and like we have these bear hair technician jobs. They don't have to be. It's always in the summer. It's usually from mid-May or mid-August, so they can get jobs like that where they're not dealing necessarily directly with the bear, but they're in bear country. They're seeing bears. They're in extreme heat. They're in mosquito-infested swamps. They're in muddy areas. They're using ATVs. They're hooking up the boats and trailers. I wouldn't say, hey, I'm only interested in bears. I would do whatever is available, because that's going to get you introduced to things that you might actually be more, you might like more, or that you might be better suited for. And you're going to meet people, and maybe that person you meet knows somebody that's really well connected in the bear world. So, don't pin yourself down to just one species. As college students, if you can get with the agency you want or the species you want, take the job, because you're never going to get everything. If you got 50% of what you want, go with it. See where it leads you.
How can a student prepare themselves for the fact that they may be around when euthanasia is called for?
Where we live, our department, we have public areas and we have public deer hunts, and we take samples off those deer. And one of the local colleges, they have a wildlife class, and they bring them out during that time, and they help us take those samples. And it can be a brainstem sample for chronic wasting disease. It may be a stomach sample for food. Just the anatomy of the animal on the inside. Where is the spleen? How do you tell it apart from the liver? Explain to me what this is. And seeing what a gunshot wound looks like. And if you've got a sort to that, that's much more messy than a clean animal that died of natural causes, or that was put down, with a drug or something.
Important for wildlife biologists to have a master's degree or even a PhD, or is a bachelor's degree enough?
Well, it varies, and you don't necessarily need a master's or a PhD. It depends on where you're going to work, what agency or organization. If you want to be more specialized, I would suggest that. Now, what a master's or a PhD can do for you is it makes you more competitive.
Are there any misconceptions around black bears in Louisiana that hampers your work?
Certainly. So people, and we're all guilty of this. They base everything off their own experiences and observations. So when you tell them, hey, there's about 1,500 bears in the state, no, there's not. There's 3 or 4 times that many. Well, we have hard data, and while we may be conservatively low, they have no data.
Please, can you suggest a research project for an undergraduate student?
For an undergraduate, I want them to apply for those jobs and be in the field. For a graduate or a master's or a PhD, I would like for them to be looking at, hey, we've been doing this capture, mark, recapture. It works great. It's expensive. Can we tweak it to make it better?
Summary, John. What advice would you give a wildlife biology student?
Be open. Work hard at everything you do. Remember, a lot of your young or a lot of jobs you have when you're young, they're long-term job interviews, and based on how well you did that, can really affect your future.
If you could tell us what your position is, your job title, and where you work, please.
My name is John Hanks. I'm the Large Carnivore Programme Manager for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and I work throughout the state of Louisiana, primarily in the Mississippi River Delta and the Ouachita River Basin, the Tensas River Basin, but we do have bears statewide. That delta and river bottom areas tend to have our most dense populations.
John, thank you so much for being on the Practical Animal channel. John Hanks.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.